It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Daniela Jaramillo-Dent, who will speak about the Platformed Migrant, Belonging, Agency, and Voice in Algorithmic Spaces of Oppression. Dr. Daniela Jaramillo-Dent has been a senior researcher and teaching associate in the Media Change and Innovation Division since December 2022. Dr. Jaramillo-Dent has worked as a research consultant for the UNHCR Innovation Service, exploring digital leisure as a pathway to inclusion for refugees. In 2021, she was invited to serve as part of the advisory board for the European project Smart EU to design a social media resilience toolkit. She has also been part of the two national R&D projects in Spain, exploring social media influencers, and between 2019 and 2022, Dr. Jaramillo-Dent led the Spanish team in the European project A Chance for Change, exploring media education and restorative justice to face gender-based violence in youth contexts. Her doctoral dissertation focused on the ways in which social media platforms shape narratives about immigration created by different actors, including politicians, general content creators, immigrants, and immigrant influencers. Her work exploring othering, belonging, identity, activism, and minority content creation on visual social media has been published in journals such as New Media and Society, European Journal of Communication. So it's my pleasure to welcome Daniela. Thank you so much for being here, and
thank you. Sure, thank you so much for the invitation. I will stand because I think better when I'm standing. I really appreciate the invitation. It is great. I really enjoy, of course, talking about this work. And although the work I will talk about today is 2 years old, I finished 2 years ago. It is, I think, as relevant as ever to explore the potential, the voices that come out of social media and the ways in which these algorithmic systems provide opportunity, but also oppression, right, to these groups. So let's start. No, it doesn't want to start. Okay. So first, I will talk a little bit about the context of the research I will be discussing today. I wanted to explore migration discourse on social media. So at that time in 2018, very little research had been done on visual social media, specifically Instagram at that time, looking at political discourse or discourse that was more serious. So at that time, I was looking, for instance, my first study looked at migrant caravans in the US and Mexico border, and I did a sample based on hashtags, and I did a multimodal analysis of this content, looking at the actors. Sorry, let me look at the time because, yeah. At the actors that discuss immigration in this context. And I was actually trying to locate the immigrants in this discourse, and it was very hard to locate them. So this was my first question. Where are the immigrants in migration narratives? How come they are not included in these narratives, their voices? Now, my second study looked at far-right politicians in Spain. So here you can start seeing the geographic, the national context where I was exploring first the US, then Spain, and I was looking at Latin American immigrants in both. So far-right politicians in Spain, I was looking specifically at their use of this Instagram story format and the way in which it is used as a persuasive tool for narratives of migration. Then my next studies focused specifically on migrants. And here I moved towards TikTok. This was in 2020 when TikTok became very popular, when the COVID came up. And at this time, what is interesting on TikTok is that you can actually locate all these voices. They are there. Although they are invisible, they're concealed, not always recommended by the algorithm, they are definitely present and you can find them. And this is the case for migrants, but also for other marginalized communities. And this was interesting at that time. So I looked at two different actors. On the one hand, immigrants, general immigrants on TikTok, locating them through keywords, hashtags, and ethnographic observation. And on the other hand, immigrant influencers. And this was, I guess, one of the first more innovative findings at this time, that there were people who were becoming very salient in these spaces and whose voices were becoming, their expertise in migration was becoming recognized in these spaces. After looking at these two groups, I looked at two phenomena that I thought were interesting. On the one hand, algorithmic invisibility, this notion that marginalized groups cannot be excessively visible because they become, they put themselves in danger, but also they want their voices to come out. So there's this a strategic level of conspicuousness that they have in these spaces. And on the other hand, the notion of narrative agency. And this was my last study. I wanted to end with a note of hope. The idea that telling your story online can also provide some small but relevant forms of agency and maybe changing, even in a small way, your reality. So I would say the theoretical framework stands between these two, the social technical aspects of narratives of migration. On the one hand, it was shaped by the establishment of otherness and sameness, the ways in which migrants, beyond their migratory status, establish themselves as similar to others and become visible through their connection to creators that may or not be migrants. They have similarities in terms of interests, but also in terms of nationality. And the same for otherness. On the one hand, the traditional notion of otherness from the in-group and out-group perspective, but also horizontal forms of otherness that are developed between migrants themselves. And this was interesting to see how there were very different dimensions and levels of othering. Now, of course, identity and the construction perspective of the identity was relevant for my research, the notion of belonging and the ways in which migrants establish their right to belong. And finally, the notion of agency, and specifically narrative agency, and the ways in which telling your story can be a form of agency. Now, in terms of the technical aspects, I was interested in looking at the political nature of platforms and the ways in which they become spaces where what is seen and what is told about a certain group is decided through processes of moderation, and the ways in which these actors negotiate this moderation and maintain their content at a certain level of visibility. And of course, the notion of algorithms and how algorithms are experienced by immigrants as they tell their stories, but also the ways in which they appear in their stories as relevant actors. Now, in the center is where I locate, I would say, the platform migrant, the social technical aspects of platforms. And here we have a lot of research in the field of media and migration. And the first one would be by Kuliaraki and Gorgiou, the digital borders. And we could expand that to mean the digitalization of the symbolic bordering that exists for migrants, but also the ways in which these really, for some very precarious migrants, become a very real offline experience of oppression. And of course, this extends to algorithmic bordering as well. The notion of digital belonging, where studies explore actually how digital spaces can become spaces of belonging for migrants. And here, usually what is explored is the use of forums or digital groups. But I'll explain to you later how I expanded these to these algorithmic spaces of belonging. And then, of course, the notion of algorithmic oppression, famous by Safiya Noble, the idea that the representations of different marginalized groups online perpetuate notions of oppression. And finally, and my favorite, I think, platform affordances and vernaculars, and the ways in which groups appropriate these grammars and logics of a specific platform and make it their own, but also how they create their own vernaculars that are niche to the community, especially in order to make their content visible amongst people who are marginalized. Now, I want to talk a little bit about my own positionality, and you will see a lot of parallelisms between my own research and my own life experience. I am originally from Ecuador, and I have migratory experience in Spain and the United States. When I think about research on marginalized groups, because of my own experience, because we are in Switzerland, I like to think about a range between precarity and privilege. And my own experience really reflects this. And I think as researchers, when we research marginalized groups, we tend to focus on the most precarious, and this is valuable, and this we should. But I do think there is a range of precarity and privilege, and sometimes this range is not reflected in research, especially in migration research. And I think it's valuable because it gives us hope to look at other types of migrants. So in my case, my precarity and privilege is reflected, for instance, in my experience as an undocumented immigrant in the United States for 4 years, in Spain for 1 year, I was undocumented. I became a resident of both countries and a citizen of Spain 2 years ago. I traveled by plane, of course. I was very privileged in this way. I was a student and a professional. I was proficient in the languages, and I had very strong support networks. Now, I am the daughter of an American citizen, the mother of an American and a Spanish citizen, and the wife of a Spanish citizen. And this is both a source of precarity and privilege. On the one hand, it is a privilege that my loved ones don't experience migration, but it is precarious because they don't understand what I was going through. In many cases, I was undocumented while they were not, and this was an interesting place to be in. And these are the lives of migrants. Each migrant that we study has a similar experience and different at the same time. Now, the methods that I use, okay, good. So the methods, I took a digital ethnographic approach, and in this sense, I engaged in extended observations. Here I am focusing specifically on the groups of migrants that I explored. I located 53 immigrant creators. I think if today we were to do this, we will find that we would need a sample, but at that time, 53 was the number of creators that were habitually uploading content in these countries. I did it for 26 months, these extended observations, field notes, exploring the languages, the practices, etc. I did a walkthrough of the platforms, and here I carried out two different, this is an ethnography of the platform itself. It tries to explore the design features, but also the trends and narrative genres that exist in the platform. And I did two types of walkthroughs. I adapted this method, one as a creator, because I was trying to understand what was embedded in the narratives, what was required as a level of skill. And on the other hand, as a user or consumer, to see, for instance, the ways in which content is recommended, the ways in which I can share this content, and how the reuse and resignification of content is possible. For instance, on TikTok specifically, the creation of a duet or the reuse of an audio track. So to understand how content comes to be, the walkthrough enables you to see how content can be reused, resignified. The second method was the multimodal content analysis. And in this sense, I was interested in exploring visual, textual, and oral content, but also content that was specific to the platforms, specifically interactive content that exists. For instance, stickers on stories or the audio track links on TikTok, and seeing how these interactive elements also shape the ways the stories are told. And I did this for a lot of different formats, but I would say mainly for TikTok videos, Instagram stories, and Instagram posts. And finally, I did interviews with some of the most prominent immigrant influencers in both countries. And I explored exactly what was that they were trying to do and how their experience was with the platform. I would say there are three main findings, conceptual findings in my work. And especially my work on migrants. And the first one is the extension of these digital belongings I mentioned before into platform belonging. So the idea here is that there are no spaces where you sign up and go in and you're in a safe place of belonging, but actually you create spaces of belonging through the use of these affordances, vernaculars of the platform, these connective elements such as audio tracks, such as hashtags, such as the use of a specific sticker can actually become the space where you belong. And you can belong to different spaces through the use of different elements. So you can see that the functions of these affordances and vernaculars is to self-identify, connect, but also to counter and establish a dialogue with existing narratives. The second concept relates to algorithmic invisibility tactics. So here what we see is creators who actually deploy specific strategies to get their content picked up by the platform's algorithm, regardless of its level of controversy. And what is important here is that migrant content is not controversial per se, but it is made or deemed controversial through systems of oppression, basically. And we see this, of course, in the literature, but it is this aspiration of the narratives to fit. And we see Padura, for instance, talks about this. And it's important to note that in order to do this, they maintain a middle level of visibility. They don't want to be very visible, but they don't want to be completely obscure. And the last one is the notion of migrant platform agency. And here what we're seeing is the different levels of narrative agency and this perceived power of personal and collective narratives using a specific platform affordances to stimulate change. And also looking at the ways in which they want to change the community itself. And you'll see what I mean with some examples that I brought for you. I'll make a little ethical note here. So I work in the intersection of three fields. One is migration research, the other one is communication research, and finally, internet research. And let's just say I learned a lot from internet research in terms of how I can do visual analysis of content in some ways when it's impossible to contact some of the creators. So I use a method by Annette Markham. It's used fabrication as ethical practice. And basically, you will see a lot of illustrations made by me to make it impossible to identify the original content. If you want to know more about this, we can talk, but just a note. So this is one of those. So here what we see is in 2020, this was a very common visual and audio vernacular of TikTok. I call it the pointing and dancing. And at this point, the way this worked, and if you use that, you're familiar with it, but the way this worked was using a very popular song to tell, usually to list something. And it could be, what is great about living in Zurich? It could be, what is wonderful about this cream? Things like this. For migrants, it became a way in which they talked about the ways they are oppressed, their experiences in the country, the benefits and negative aspects of being a migrant. And in this case, you see a specific, very practical forms of migrant belonging specifically, where they provide the specific documents you need to migrate to Spain as a Latin American migrant. So you can see how a very serious, very practical aspect is shaped into these very fun types of trends using the vernaculars of the platform. Another function of these is using a very popular song to get picked up because popular songs at that time worked for this. This has changed on TikTok. Today, actually, original voices and original recordings are more prioritized. So this is another note, methodological note. Platforms change. So it is very hard also to analyze these types of technologies because they are always evolving, sometimes completely changing the way they work. Now, in terms of algorithmic invisibility tactics, I interviewed this creator, and he is a Mexican creator who was undocumented for 24 years. Once he became a citizen, he took it as his goal in life to make visible the injustices that migrants faced in the US. Specifically, he would follow ICE agents who were concealed, who wouldn't, let's say, who they are, and he would face them, and he would record them, and he would post this online, and this was his work. So his life was mostly in danger. And here what we see is his use of the vernacular and the platform affordance of the duet, the resignifying affordance of the duet to amplify migrant voices. So here we also see this idea of privilege versus precarity, the idea that an undocumented immigrant. Since 2017, there are laws in the United States where they can look at your social media content in order to make decisions about your migratory situation. So this amplifying function is very interesting because someone who is not in danger gives voice to someone who is in danger. And his goal here is to give him a voice, but also to show what happens and how you can avoid it, by making visible the constitutional rights of migrants. And this becomes very interesting now, because now we see a lot of content like this, but what is happening now is that actually laws are just being ignored. So it doesn't matter what rights you have, basically. And here, of course, we see the different forms of belonging and invisibility. He becomes less visible, but he makes his case valuable for the community. Here what we see is what I call the audio profile page. So if you use TikTok, when you click on an audio track, you come to this. Who here has never used TikTok? Never used TikTok? Oh, okay. Okay, so if you go into TikTok and you click on the audio track, it will take you to a page that shows all the videos that have ever used this audio track. And this is what I have called the audio track profile picture. So it is very interesting because it also has other things now, like Spotify links, other things, and AI-generated identification of copyright. A lot of interesting things happening. At this time, what I was looking for was the number of times it was used. This is an illustration by me again. The number of times, and also it gives you a very clear visual perspective of patterns in the data. In this case, what you can see, this is an audio recording of an instance of verbal abuse of a house worker. Again, a creator becomes the amplifier, shares this on their TikTok, and people reuse. The first one is they actually give instructions on how to share in order to avoid it being eliminated. And the next ones actually provide notions of support and experiences that they also suffered. So the voice of the original migrant is still present, and the writing has a function of supporting and giving, validating. So this is very similar to other trends on social media, such as the Me Too trend, Black Lives Matter, where one voice is not enough. We need to get a lot of people who also had this experience in order to validate it. And we see it also with migrants. Now the next one, this one was a challenge for me. So this one was a right-leaning Trump supporting immigrant. And she, what is interesting about her specifically, a lot of interesting things, but here for the sense of algorithmic invisibility, is that she also follows this logic of, I'm going to, in TikTok, there's the stitch function where you create a video stitching with others. So you stitch other people's videos behind yours. And what she does here is she actually adds videos by other Latin American immigrant creators who support Trump to validate her right to be conservative and to validate the right of immigrants to have any ideology. Now, the final example is an example of this narrative platform agency, and this is the one that I find most interesting, and is what I have called prescriptive agency. The idea that migrants, once they reach a level of privilege, very often turn to give instructions on how to be a good migrant to other migrants. So in this case, the case here is a Colombian immigrant who was telling other Colombian immigrants that they should leave their Colombianness behind and they should become more European and behave in a way that is more accepted. And we see a lot of this in migration narratives, this idea that we all need to comply and this is how we should behave in order to be accepted. This idea that the deservingness to belong depends on all of us behaving in a certain way. So the key takeaways from what my research, I would think, the first one is that there are different forms, the different hierarchies being created between migrants and their context. Some of these hierarchies are created within migrant communities themselves. On the other hand, we see that social media really shapes migrant narratives and their visibility, but also now they have become even more complex and more adapted to the platforms. But also we see that the specific migrant communities create micro or niche vernaculars, genres, and languages that only they understand. And that enables this content to conceal in what has been called algo speak, or concealing language within other language that is more acceptable by the platform. And the last one is, and here the one that is most, I think, important now, is that for many immigrants, creating content about themselves is really an act of courage. And the fact that this content is even present is really interesting, because for many, they will put their lives in danger, but also their migratory status in danger. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting. Like, I also connected some things to my research or like my past research. So thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
I open have question, comment, thoughts.
Thank you so much for this talk. I thought it was really interesting and very rich. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. There was something you said that I thought was really interesting. When you discussed digital belonging, you were mentioning that the use of a hashtag, or you were saying that the use of a hashtag can become the space to which you belong. I thought that was interesting. And I wonder how that sort of sits, or how you brought that into conversation with more traditional, perhaps intersectional and feminist theories on which insist more on the body and kind of embodiment.
Interesting. Okay, let's break this down, right? So I'll give you an example, maybe is the best way. So when you look at content and talk to immigrants themselves, what you see is that there are micro communities, right? So within the idea of the Latin American immigrant, Then there are communities based, for instance, on their nationality. So one community that became very visible for me was the Honduran community. And Honduran creators, on the one hand, very often would show, I would say the embodiment here is not a physical form of embodiment, but more of a digital representative form of embodiment, where they actually wear the colors of their flag. And often they pair this with dancing punta music, which is the Honduran genre of preference. And they talk about their own Honduran nationality a lot and their culture. Now, the hashtag example is good. The Honduran example is good because they actually have a series of hashtags that only Hondurans would understand. Specifically, they have one that is called catracho, which is a word that Hondurans call themselves. I am a Latin American. I had never heard of it. I had to go in to look what this was. And then they also use hashtags of, for instance, area codes. So this is interesting because at first sight, if you look at this, if you don't know the cultural context, you don't understand what this is. It looks like a Latin dance. Some colors, their colors are blue and white, so it could be a lot of different colors. So the way this is the way they embody their representing their own nationality. And they use this multimodal representation of who they are as migrants, but also they conceal their content and they connect with their niche community through hashtags. And this is the space of belonging. Only people who understand this word are able to belong. And this also exists among general content creators, right? They use FYP for visibility, ABC, they have forums where they agree on words, on hashtags that allow them. And this is also used for bad, right? We also have incels who use also this in order to connect. So it's used for both sides. But this would be the example of this, the embodiment, multimodality. In some cases, the embodied part is not present. So some of the content, they would record a wall in order to avoid being present, to tell stories that maybe are very painful, especially the one, for instance, this woman, this recording, a lot of the people who wanted to support her, they would just record like a wall. And this is also a strategy of being disembodied from the content. I don't want to be part of it, but I want to be part of, I belong to this group as well. So this is how I would, yeah. Sure. Yes.
I really like the idea of or the concept of blogosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really dystopian, but I guess it's a way to navigate networks.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, now that all of these digital spaces are transformed by artificial intelligence, what happens in the next few years to these communities? Like, is this an advantage or a disadvantage?
It's very interesting. So I'll tell you what I'm studying now. This is not here, but what I have been doing in the last few months. I've been looking at the soundscapes of migration. So because I have become kind of an expert on TikTok. My daughter is very popular because of this. My mother looks at TikTok for work. It's true. So yeah, so audio is becoming, so the multimodality of content is very important in this sense. Because it's a good example for the AI area, I think, because the visual is being affected. And of course, the oral, all the voices, the AI voices, and we also see that audio, in this case, audio is very interesting, right, for me. So I did a study on the soundscapes of migration, and I found that audio is often used to conceal the person who is providing the advice, when the advice is controversial. So for instance, there's advice on TikTok on how to enter the US illegally. And usually in this type of content, they will use, you know, these collages of videos, usually AI generated images of the border, of farms, of the work you will get, AI generated visuals, very general, not specific, and AI generated voices that provide the advice. So in this case, it is arguable if this is morally right or wrong, but definitely it is a way, also a form of algospeak, to just blend with the general AI generated work and provide this type of information. And you see that in this type of content, there are a lot of hashtags, again, that seem to be the connectors, but there's definitely this anonymization function of AI. Now, on the other hand, AI is problematic because it now, you can see very clearly the priorities of platforms. So AI, on one hand, generates content, but on the other hand, is being used to recognize things in content, right? And we know this from algorithmic moderation, but you can see it very clearly in audio, again, in sound. One of the things I noticed before, in my previous wave of research, when it was very common for creators to avoid moderation from copyright for songs by uploading their own audio of the song. So for instance, there was a big issue with Warner Music, where all songs by Warner were taken down from TikTok. Yeah, creators lost their audio. So what they would do is upload the song recorded with their phone, for instance, and upload it. And this was a good way to avoid it because the song was recorded as original sound by the creator. But now what I see in this profile picture of the song, that they actually have, say, this song contains, which means that they are using AI to recognize songs in content. But we see this because there's a function there, so you can look for the song and find it, but we can imagine what they can do, right? They can recognize voices, they can recognize, of course, we know faces, we know all of these, but we can see the priorities because copyright holders are usually big corporations. So we see the power of AI and how it is being used rather than maybe helping someone, right? Or making sure people are represented correctly, etc. So yeah, this is my point, I guess, in AI, but this is still to be seen, I think. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
About using hashtags that we find because very different from like standards based. I've seen a lot that sometimes the same tags are used by people who enjoy a certain concept or are part of a certain group, and by people who very much don't. So kind of the different. So if you look through that specific hashtag, you get a blend of people, of content about the thing and people talking very, very negatively about the thing. Does that also happen with these, more specific identity building hashtags?
So I would say, so hashtags are great. If you've never used TikTok, this is a great example of all the elements on TikTok that are connective. So hashtags would be the element that you all identify as a connective element on social media platforms. So you click on the hashtag, you can see all the content with this hashtag. On TikTok, there's a lot of elements like this. One is sound, but another one is also the possibility of reusing a whole video. So I would say in this sense, the reuse of videos, so the possibility of stitching with someone else or creating a duet is also used to attack, right? So hashtags, of course, at the level of the hashtag is done, but on TikTok, there are much better ways to attack someone, like just taking their content, reusing it, just saying whatever. So yeah, the answer is you want to use your audio, maybe better because, yeah.
Thank you so much for the questions. Okay, well, thanks for this productive questions and this discussion. It's my pleasure to welcome Qingyi Ren, who will speak about contamination as queerness, challenging normative violence from facial recognition to machine translation. Qingyi Ren is a digital artist and researcher at the Critical Media Lab in Basel. Their work delves into the intersection of art, technology, and social justice with a pattern for web of gender theory, AI ethics, and visual identity. They're currently based in Basel and Linz, and dedicate their artistic practice to unveiling the subtle biases ingrained within the realm of machine learning and its profound impact on marginalized identities. Further thought-provoking artistry, they challenge the status quo and inspire critical conversations surrounding the ethics of artificial intelligence. You're currently a PhD candidate in the Collaborative Makes Sense program at the University of Arts Linz and the Basel Academy of Arts and Design, which promotes practice-based research in arts and design. Please give a warm welcome to Qingyi Ren.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for being here. Good afternoon. So my name is Qingyi Ren, and as Sophie mentioned, I'm currently pursuing my PhD at Critical Media Lab Basel. So it's a space where we do most of like media study and also artistic practice research. So the way I working on the project is a bit different. So I try to make it a bit relaxed. Yeah, let's see. I will show a few like media artwork I have done before, and also like I reflect on the art I'm working with. So I work at Critical Media Lab Basel now as a researcher with this is my PhD project, Queerness as a gap. This is a 4-year research project funded by SNF.ch. So this project investigates how digital technology shape and constrain queer expression and identity. So it's basically include 3 main case study: facial recognition, and the current I'm working on the machine translation, and also the conversational AI to examine where AI and the digital interface misidentify or misrepresent, misclassify queerness. So today I'm going to share part of my ongoing research, and I hope our discussion will explore the following question. How does it mean to exist as a queer body in digital space and interface? And how do digital interface and AI technology restrict and shape queerness within online environment? And how can queerness do it in response? Here I showed a bit like small practice to give a bit sense of what's going on with AI and gender. This is a screenshot from Blue Willow. It's a cheap, like free AI generator, and I gave the prompt I gave is a successful human and a successful female. Here is the result. I won't explain more, just show as it would be. So before diving into my research, I want to provide some key background to situate my knowledge and perspective, like Daniela did, like we give some background. Yeah, so at the same time, it can also respond to our theme of intersectionality today. So to begin answering my first question, what does it mean for me or my body to be a queer body in digital space? I will share a bit about my personal experience. So I grew up in China, the country that has witnessed a rapid digital transformation, and I'm the generation so-called like digital native. So in recent years, China has also become a leader in AI development. For my personal perspective, here are 3 key reasons for this rapid development. The huge population, or more precisely, the number of internet user provide a huge number of data we can use. And also, for last year, June, the internet penetration rate in China reached 78%, and the number of internet users is about 1.1 million. And the internet, the national regulatory system and the widespread development of biometric technology has led to blur boundary between the personal information and personal privacy. So that's make all this data to be collected legally and be used to train. And the COVID is really a huge reason makes the AI develop. Before moving to Europe, I lived in Hangzhou. You may not familiar with this name, but you have probably heard about Alibaba and also DeepSeek. DeepSeek also from the university I graduated from. So Hangzhou is one of China's major hub for internet technology and AI development. Living as a queer person in this kind of like technological advanced city was like an interesting experience. By the end of 2020, my university dormitory has already adapted facial recognition access control at the entries. At the beginning, our data are not registered in the system yet, but I always be misclassified as a male and be rejected into the dormitory. And the introduction of this facial recognition makes things just even more complicated for me. And then the COVID hit. Well, I won't delve into the pandemic like broader political and social implication. I want to highlight how our identity be digitalized. In China, people were strictly monitored and quarantined. Midway through the pandemic, the government introduced a QR code system. So everyone's biometric information will be stored in this like QR code, and you have to do COVID tests every day. And it's if you scan the QR code, they got your name and also like where it comes from and how is your health situation. And yeah, so in fact, near everyone, although I'm not sure if everyone, but through this QR code system, the everyone's information was digitally managed and categorized into predefined data boxes such as gendered male and female. So, and as the development was happened so quick, and we even have no chance for the public reaction and also for the questioning. One statement I read in a Chinese government document keep like around me is the personal information is not mean personal privacy. It's right in the official Chinese document, and all this personal data can be reasonably used to advance the smart transportation, smart city, and other governance framework. To summarize, in China's rapid AI development, our personal data is forcefully collected, sorted, and processed under the heteronormative system, fueling the growth of AI technology. This is the context of where I comes from. So I welcome all kind of opinion and knowledge, but for me, the science is set to its knowledge. Sorry, the science is set to its knowledge. Dynamic, constant, bored, and subject to reversion. And as transdisciplinary field, gender and sexuality exemplify the contextual and situated nature of all knowledge products. At the same time, science and technology have profound impacts, both productive and constraint on how gender and sexuality are organized in society, as well as on our personal experience of gendered and sexualized identity. Now I will return to my work with AI and gender. The book I haven't shown here, if anyone interested in the feminist and queer science study, I highly recommend you read the introduction chapter of this book. It gives you, I think, a very good start and summarize of like how it works, this queer feminism science study. Yeah. So one of my important area of research is queer AI. Many of you likely familiar with biases embedded in AI and machine learning system. If you are not, don't worry, I will explain more. So particularly regarding genders, issue like the historical gender bias reflect in training data, such as the gender role. Like for example, if you use a lot of machine translation, if you use the doctor as a subject, the gender will address to male. If you use nurse, it's female. And unfortunately, this research already done around 2015. People working with Google on how Google address gender, but until now, it's still happening in a lot of new like machine translation software. And also data imbalance, where minority group are underrepresented, leading to poor performance for those identity. And also gender imbalance in AI research and the development team, and also some other reason. Although technology is often present as natural or even a black box, but it's not black box. We know what's going on. And this biases persist, reinforcing stereotype. And many scholars include like Joy Brown-Winnie, who work with the Black women cannot be recognized through the recognition. And also Oskis, who works on the like automatic gender recognition with transgender. And also myself, as I have explored this problem from different angle. So I'm gonna start with my first case study, facial recognition and gender. It's one of my earliest engagement with AI. Like I mentioned before, if I thinking about AI in China, the facial recognition comes first. And when I first time used testing this different facial recognition in the workshop, it's really upset for me. The system rapidly misidentify me as a female. Everyone receive different and often like different results, and the results are different, changing all the time, which become a running joke. Everyone said, "Oh, well, see, this machine recognize me as a 51% male, but next time it's like 52% female." But for me, it's more than a stupid machine joke. It's like the mirror, the real world bias that has misgendered me since my childhood, it goes to this digital world again. So when the machine identified me as a 91% male, it was not just an error. It's a technological extension of social bias into the digital realm. So this experiment this experience leads me to experiment with AI. Over a time, I found that my face as a queer face, fantastic, which is easy to confuse AI. If I cover one side of my face, I become male, and cover other side, I become female. So I start to systematic testing, like how Amazon. I was working with Amazon recognition, how Amazon recognition can change, like how I can confuse this system and like it's change, like they recognize me differently. But I failed because it's influenced by the lighting angle and everything a lot. But during this process, I have tested a lot of software during this process, and I found, for example, a lot of Chinese facial recognition software has more chance to recognize me as a female compared with Western software. So I think it's bit to response to highlight the issue beyond gender, such as race and age, and just response to the intersectionality of our identity. So feeding my photo to Amazon over a long period, I was repeatedly gendered without any opportunity to claim for myself. However, this also bring me this like keep feeding this picture bring me. I have a lot of a picture with different percentage number of my gender, and during this experiment, I never got 100% male or female. I know it's really easy to explain it mathematically, but also if we think about the gender, the binary machine still failed to identity binary gender, so we are all in between. So I think that's a queer perspective also to understand like how this bias in AI works. Yeah, so this is a work I have done 2022 is during my master study. And this was during the pandemic, so I have a lot of chance to do this online performance with different workshops. We play with how we confuse machine to show our fluidity and the performative of the identity. Yeah, so here I go the second case study, the thing I'm currently working with. So actually it's not that recently, I found DeepL. I don't know if you use or not, but it's really quite widely used translation tool. And the performance poorly translated queer related terminology between English and the English and the Chinese translation. For example, I show here the first word Chinese 同性恋, which is homosexual, be translated as homophobic. And the homophobic right be translated as homosexual right. So so I started to working with how this like translation result comes from, and I believe it also reflects deep root biases in the training data. And if you go closer, if you may know the DeepL come from a Germany company. Linguist was a dictionary company before. If you go closer, like how this word will be translated, they will lead you to this Linguist web page. And here you can see some external source of where this word comes from. Like, so here I found the they use a lot of like massive what's the word, parallel croppers, yes, this word. So include a lot of UN diplomatic document. This official document often exclude or distorted LGBTQ language, reinforcing a heteromatic language pattern. As a result, machine translation system has difficult to adapt to a queer language practice, often eraser or distorted queer machine. For example, the word that often accompany homosexual are hate, fear, and disgust. This directly lead to the confusion in the machine learning. So it is worth to mention that I'm currently working on the queer annotation of this UN crop, and also I'm archiving the queer mistranslation in DeepL and also in the other translation tool. Hope I can share with you soon. That's the thing I'm working just currently. So this example exposes the maze of pure data. The idea that the data sets are neutral or objective in reality. In reality, all data is shaped by human choice, historical context, and social norms. Queer theory challenge this boundary by embracing ambiguity and fluidity. From this perspective, we can view data contamination not as an error to be correct, but as a sign of queerness within computational system. So I don't know if you read this book before, it's my favorite book recently. It's an ethnographic research about about this mushroom. And the writer Anna Singh in this book introduced a concept of this contamination, and this is referred to interweaving and nonlinear development with ecological, economic, and critical and cultural system. In this book, she described how matutic mushroom grow in industrial rule, illustrating how impurity can become a foundation for new form of life. This emphasis on contamination are linked close with queer theory challenge to binary operations, myths of purity and normativity. Queer theory fundamentally question the assumption of purity as an idealistic, arguing that all identity, practice, and the relationship are fluid and entangled, rather than fixed and clear, definable. Similarity since concept of contamination dismantles the illustration of independent ecosystem or autonomous economies, emphasizing the interdependence of hybridity of things. Contamination is not destructive external force, but an inevitable generative power, much like queer theory. Identity is not fixed, but constantly reshaped and remade through various relationship and environments. Sorry, I'm hard to yeah. In the context of data technology and artificial intelligence, contamination is also served as dismantling the maze of pure data, just as Judy Butler's performative, arguing that the gender is constructive through the performative actors rather than be innate. Data is not raw or objective, but is continuously contaminated by history, culture, and power during this collection, classification, and use. So this contamination is not only unavoidable, but also shapes the meaning and utility of data. In this sense, contamination is both queer mode of existence and the queer methodology. It rejects a singular perspective, emphasizing entanglement, hybridity, and uncertainty, prompting us to rethink how technology, ecology, data, and the social system operate. Within this framework, contamination is not an error, but a pathway beyond the the normative thinking of creative, uncertain, and queer space possibility. Yeah, so here I got the conclusion towards queer AI. To conclude, contamination is not just a technical glitch. It's a queer force that disrupts the fantasy of pure data and objective knowledge. If we acknowledge the data itself is always contaminated, then the data contamination is not a mistake that need to be correct, but a generated written queer force is relevant into the intersectionality, historicity, and fluidity of data, compelling us to rethink power structure behind the maze of pure data. When DeepL distort home sexually into the homophobia, it's inadvertently explores the complicity between the algorithm power and the colonial modernity. Yet, it is precisely this traumatic presence of contamination that provide a foothold for queer resistance in the fissure of Krapa on the rule of the mistranslation we may creative cybermastic mushroom for the digital age, a form of queer life that thrives in impurity, refuse to be co-opted by the maze of purity. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, the last few part is just the paper I'm writing recently, so that's the first time I try to read this. Yeah, anyway, thank you so much.
Like I'm also engaging with some of the concepts that you mentioned, and I found it like in both of your presentations super cool and super good as well that you discuss your positionality and like your connection with the research, and yeah, I really love your presentation. Thank you so much. I open the floor for questions. Yeah, thank you. Also, this was very interesting. I was wondering, so there's this sort of invisibility in front of AI, or like not invisibility, but you get just like mischaracterized. And in when we see how AI is also being used for very negative purposes, is there also a positive side to being invisible to AI in this sense?
Yeah.
Or is like the negative impacts of this just kind of present for you and how you experience it?
Sure. Thank you. It's really, I mean, that's the first few thoughts when I just start work with the facial recognition, because